so being social and being engaged with people and being uh, extroverted is actually it's a muscle that you can train. It started with doing like painful small talk and forcing myself to do it because that's the way you get better. And then the more you realize that small talk, because a lot of introverts will tell you, I don't want to do small talk. I just want to talk about shit that matters. But you have to do the small talk with people to get them to a point where they trust you enough to be vulnerable enough to talk about the shit that matters to them.
So pushed our good old button to make this program tell me that recording is in progress. And you just, before we went ahead and started recording, suggested to have the first topic for today for like our section that's a little bit more fitness centered, to be about different coaching styles, why maybe I personally chose to become a coach, and then going into like a little bit more detailed um, areas of that subject, like how to coach different personalities. And then we have some concrete stuff of like how to coach through certain situations.
Yeah, well, I think it's been a trend the past couple weeks, especially since like several of your clients are getting ready to go through a big upset of their regularly scheduled programming. And I just think that people hear me talk a lot and they'd be really interested in understanding you more because I know why I selected you as my coach. But I think it'd be really interesting for a lot of people to understand like why did you become a coach and how has that influenced your coaching style and the way that you approach your athletes?
Yes, a part of this is when I was probably 18, 19, 20 years old and first started falling in love with more strength training, and if you want to call it hypertrophy oriented training, and then strength training as a means to an end, segueing into later on more performance athletic center training, is that um, right from the start, like my personality um, is structured in a way where I just naturally take a lot of interest in other people and what's going on with them, where maybe beyond a certain point where for like the majority of population it would be interesting. So like I'm fascinated by the training progress, progression, and habits of other people basically. So right from the start, during my first 2 years of even being a little bit more serious in gym myself, I would already start writing out training programs for friends, writing out training programs for lifting partners. I'm falling in love with the subject matter and really trying to find out everything that I could. Like the internet was a little bit more limited with the information that was around during times of like maybe 2010 to 2012. Like we had some message boards, and which I feel was an advantage back then, because um, more like limited information being available, you would have to make the most out of what you got at your disposal, and you're not being overwhelmed by
Mm-hmm.
shit tons of different stuff. So right from the start, I would take a big interest in what my friends were doing and maybe how I could help people that were just slightly behind me when I started developing a passion for my own training, and how we could all maybe structure it a little bit better together. And later on then, with my own background, it's just then what I gravitated, because very much so turned out that I was pretty good at it. I would always have like almost being being on the outside of a situation, being able to assess the situation objectively from the outside. Obviously, you're not going to have as much of a bias emotionally than you may have with your own training. So I'll be able to assess people's situation pretty good and have people always have pretty nice results, which they would always be happy with if they would choose to really follow through of what I would write out for them or help them with or tell them what to do. So um, where a little bit with that's maybe something that we could go into whenever in like a different episode, but I have like a little bit of a medical background that even led me into the gym when I was a younger teenager, which some of those issues like maybe prevent me from being someone that's not at an anatomical disadvantage to live at like say world class uh, lifting abilities, where it would then gravitate towards I was just a much better coach and producing much more reliable results with people that I was training. I was just much better at coaching than I was at lifting myself, which is just obviously like a little bit cope, but a little bit how it just goes. And
Yeah.
so just
So
focus on what you're good at.
you
And
were doing like scientific method on these people, doing little experiments because like for medical reasons you couldn't quite do them all on yourself. Plus it's different for every person. Is that what you're saying?
some of it is also that, I mean, when we talk about genetics and training, genetic potential, is that I guess one of the most important genetic variable is your capability to adapt to training stimulus, which just means person A may add 50 pounds to their squat doing the exact same training, whereas person B may just be a little genetic disadvantage right there, where their adaptation response may just let them end up with 25 pounds on this, which is still a great result. But
Mm-hmm.
obviously, different people react different to different training stimuli. Where that's just one of the biggest factors. Long story short, is just that it may not, even if all your variables in your training as hard as possible, you're eating optimally, um, you're recovering perfect. It's just at the end of the day, the results of what you're going to get out of any individual training block um, may just not be in your hands. You can just optimize your progress, but how much you're going to gain is a little bit determined by your genetics. Put it like that.
Yeah.
Whereas training several people like later on, then having like a whole team of athletes that I was coaching, where I would have much more control about helping them optimize their progress and helping them optimize their process, most likely,
Because you're
which then
detached from the whole thing. Like you're looking from the outside in and saying, these are your weaknesses, these are your strengths. Whereas maybe training on yourself or making your own program, instead of having that detachment, you're like, God, I suck at this. I hate this. I don't want to do, I'm terrible at squats. I'm
no.
not gaining as fast. But with you as the coach on the outside, those same athletes are getting that objective. You know, you're progressing at a steady rate. These are your strengths. These are where you need to apply a little bit more attention to your accessories, or dial in your training technique just a tad.
Yes, 100%. That's 100% of what I was trying to convey over here. Um, yeah,
So you mentioned that you had like a medical event, and we've talked a lot about my cancer and how that
yeah.
affected how I train and how I think. So would you say that that medical issue also affected your training style? Because I found your training style to be very different than what you might find on Instagram or on Facebook with like the grind set trainers and like the
Yes.
Instagram workouts. So how would you say, did it affect your style, and how did it affect your style?
I think it because I really like had to reverse engineer how my body works and how to really learn how to move again at certain points in time with rehabilitation processes after severe surgeries, was that I would say that led me into so much trial and error process and so many years with that it helped me develop an approach that was able to help people prevent injuries or work around injuries, help people in performance athletics work through injuries while at the same time rehabilitating them, always with a bigger picture and a long-term picture in mind to preserve quality of life at all times as one of the main priorities, as opposed to just like putting it in mind, like I've had training partners in the past, and where I met people who, like, where I thought I was training hard, and then was shown through all different works of life, where it be people that actually trained in prison for decades, or were competitive bodybuilders. I mean, very much accomplished competitive bodybuilders, or like top level lifters, wherever. Where I've seen it all over more than like 12 to 14 years. And long story short, like, the reason I'm bringing this up is just that, like training insanely hard and running someone into the ground is not really hard to do. Like, everyone can make someone do so many reps, so many drop sets, and whatever intensity techniques to tear things down insanely. But really having long-term sustainable approaches, I found over the years, requires quite a bit more sophistication and a little bit more finesse and a little bit more context and experience with working with different people, with different leverages, different morphologies, where it be 60-kilogram girls, 120-kilogram, 260-pound men that are already very strong, carry loads of muscle. Like, they're probably not going to be doing the exact same program, even though
Hmm.
we may still adhere to some general principles, although we may, at the end of the day, not all be too much of like individual snowflakes, and we might like to think. Where
Yeah.
someone asked me on Friday, as we were editing podcast episodes, that where I would think, how much coaching women, because my clients, my coachees, ever since started working professionally, have skewed much more female.
Hmm.
Where I would think, like, differences were with coaching women, like how much training and coaching would be different. And although there are certain variables to keep in mind, which are going to be a little bit different for women, so many general principles and so much more will still be super similar. Where you also had a training partner that was just able to still make progress off of the same program that I initially written out for you, for instance. It's just
Yeah,
maybe
while
like
he was
a
still
good
going
example.
before he quit.
Where it's just, anything performed with effort is going to give you some type of result. But yeah, that's a little bit of my training and coaching background, and maybe with that history is why it slightly differs.
Yeah. Well, I know we talked a lot this past week, not just with me, but with like Maddie and Sean and a couple of other clients of yours that I know, is that like it's been kind of a tough couple weeks for a lot of us, for all kinds of different reasons, but a lot because Maddie and I especially are about to have like a huge interruption to our training plan.
Yes.
And one thing that's been like consistent, and the reason that I even signed up with you almost 2 years ago now, is because I find that your style is really engaging in a way, because there's forgiveness built into the program in a way that you don't usually see. And the forgiveness is not, oh, it's okay if you skip your workout. The
No.
forgiveness is, you're going to go and do the best you can with this workout, and then we're going to
No.
adjust your program to make sure that you're doing what you actually want to do so that long term
No.
you're completing the whole thing,
Yes.
rather than getting there and doing the compounds and skipping the
Yeah.
accessories, or doing the accessories and
And
skipping a compound, or whatever the combination is. And I think that that's been, to your point, like anybody can get broken down over a course of a few weeks, and it's kind of a temporary
yes.
process. Like basic training breaks you down over 10 weeks or 12 weeks or 22 weeks, whatever training you're in, whichever your MOS is. Like it breaks you down consistently, and then it builds you back up. And that's a great temporary solution, I think, if you're trying to do something in 6 to 8 weeks and you want like rapid, as quick results as possible. But especially in my experience, having been an athlete through college and then trying to carry that same mentality forward into adulthood, it's impossible to keep that level of intensity consistent long term. And it really, like, if you try, you're going to burn yourself out really fast. And that's why I signed up with you, because I knew before going into chemo that I was not going to have the energy to do any sort of intensity. And the name of the game for
Yes.
me was just get there and get it done. And I'd like to believe that I was a special snowflake and that was my situation and whatever. But
Yes.
so many times we see people fall off the wagon or kind of give up on their training because they've got this intensity mindset, this like you have to grind it out, and then they're miserable, versus people that go in and say, well, the goal of this is just to get it done on a regular, consistent basis.
Yeah.
And that's something about your style that I've really appreciated. And I know that your other clients have also really appreciated, especially the ones that weren't natural athletes or have not been athletic through adulthood.
Yes. And like lately we've come down to this time and time again where is so important in the middle of the road to keep reminding yourself that you have to still enjoy it. It has to still keep you motivated long term, or at least become such a habit that's so much ingrained in your daily routines that you just know something would be missing that actually makes you feel good if you do follow through. And all of this obviously does is not supposed to mean that we're just letting people off easy, that we're not still working really hard. Like, funny enough, I was in a coaching call earlier with Sean, or one of my athletes, who aware we were joking about, like, there's the fine line of being smart about it, maybe waiting another day when you're feeling achy and maybe you got some actual like slightly aggravated tendons. Maybe it's much better to still perform well at the end of the week, to wait another day to get back in the gym. But then there's this fine line to walk where you also don't want to be a little bitch and maybe need to just conquer your the little bitch voice inside of you, and maybe it is time to step on the gas again. So it's obviously also always like a fine line to work. Like, you still need to obviously work hard, where we always sort of slightly maybe even underappreciate, where that's also like sometimes accepted as a given. Okay, we know how to grind, we know how to work hard, we know how to put a lot of volume in there and still step up intensity over time.
Mhm.
But yeah, um that's definitely something that comes to mind.
I know I was
As it,
definitely there earlier this week because I was super frustrated that basically I felt like all the progress, like we're finally building momentum again after
yes,
my little dip in motivation and like the
yes,
vacation I took. And then I was so frustrated at the beginning of the week because I was like, what's the point of even going to the gym right now? I'm about to lose all the progress, all the momentum I just
yeah,
made. I don't want to be here, blah, blah, blah. And I kind of had to check myself and be
yeah,
like, well, if I don't do this workout, then it's not going to get done. Then I'm going to lose even more progress, even more momentum. Like, I'm not going forward by not doing it
yeah,
the way that I know I need to. And like, but it's still like very frustrating and it made me want to disengage completely. And then, of course, I got food poisoning at the end of the week, which was awesome.
yeah, always
So
fun.
yeah, so it's like when you have athletes that are kind of disengaging from their programs, from their coaching calls, just kind of sitting silently, what do you have, like techniques and tricks up your sleeve to get them re-engaged, or
Yes.
how do you process that? Because not everybody is like me and like some of your other clients that are just kind of like always driving at it and always wanting to look for more
Yeah.
work to do.
Yeah, so there's a lot of ground to cover with these subjects, where a lot of those will now run into each other. Like, one thing to realize obviously is that what we just mentioned with still enjoying things in the middle of the road is with something like strength, fitness, things like you're not going to be well off if you don't do this for a very long time, and you're only going to become very good should you desire to become good, should you desire to become still better and better, where like stagnation is never something that's going to be motivating, but you're only going to become good or even a little bit better if you're going to do this for a very long time. So how do we get people to stay motivated and make things a habit over there? So those are a lot of good questions. We also noted down like how to guide through these little bit of frustrating patches where maybe just your training is just picking up lots of momentum, everything's going great, and you have your life get in the way and you're just frustrated. Like, we just recently went with you through a little bit of a rough patch where just things were a little bit up and down, And so you basically a little bit experience firsthand what we were just trying to, where I feel that this is definitely something where that little bit of external accountability of having a coach is going to provide tons and tons of value to you, to just keep you that little bit of extra um, accountable and keep you a little bit motivated, much more in the long run, where guiding
I
through
think
those
that,
rough patches.
yeah, I
I would
think
say
you
a
like
lot
hit
of what it comes
something.
down to is helping the people find the right positive frame for a situation that may not be that great, where your inner monologue may trend a much more negative and just being a little bit bummed out. But then someone from the outside can help you find a positive spin on that, where, okay, like I always joke about with you guys that I'm just looking down from far 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 above and have my little puppets dance on my board, where I'm trying to look at the bigger picture. I'm trying to see,
I'm a real
like,
boy.
how can we how can we get the most out of the next 12 months of training, even though you're a
Mhm.
little bit bummed out and frustrated. So then, okay, maybe finding perspective. Okay, look, this is how far we came the past 3 months, the past 6 months, the past 12 months. Look at how much substantial progress, where people always underestimate how much progress they can make long term, but maybe slightly overestimate how much progress they can make in the short term. So then,
Mhm.
helping find that perspective, helping find positive frames for a slightly shitty situation
And
is
then
what's going to
past
go a long
perspective
way.
too. Past perspective too. I think one of the things you hit on that like really just hit it for me is accountability, because the whole reason that I even hired a coach in the first place is because like I knew that I could probably rough together a mediocre plan that would get me mediocre results.
Yeah.
But I also knew like, and I it's funny because I don't think people would expect this of me, but a lot of people assume, and rightfully, that I have like a certain high level of mental toughness for being able to like drag myself to the gym through chemo and to be able to force myself to keep training with the future in mind, because I knew going into treatment that if I didn't come out at a certain baseline of athleticism, then my future was at stake. My job with the army and the infantry, like you can't do that job without having a certain level of physicality and athleticism. It's dangerous if you try to do it without that, and it's like actual lives at stake. And so that was a huge motivating factor for me to get there. However, I knew, because I've been through some shitty situations in the past and I've been hurt in the past. I've had like injuries. I've played sports. I knew that I needed something to keep me accountable to my short term plan, because it's very easy when you're going through a lot of shitty stuff to get lost in that survival mode of it. And if I didn't have a built-in source of external accountability, then mentally I was not going to be strong enough to stick to my program, to push myself to go to the gym and to stay like on the path that I wanted to stay on. And I don't think you have to be going through something really terrible to realize that you need that external accountability. I think, if anything, people often underestimate how much daily life can get in the way of your short term and long term goals, especially with something like fitness, which is for most people not the focus of their lives. It's not even the focus of my life. Like, I have a lot of things going on in my career with jujitsu, with the army, with my friends. And so, a lot of times, the fitness aspect of things can easily get shuffled to the side. But by having a coach who understands the draw and the pull of life in different directions, but also is that external accountability, I find myself much more consistent than I was even when I was playing D1 rugby. And I find myself making like much faster, better progress, even on the weeks where I'm very frustrated and I don't want to do anything. Because we came off of that series of weeks where I was deeply unmotivated with a belted squat PR, a lifetime
No.
PR. And so it's like I can lose sight of that very easily. And mentally, I'm not always tough enough to talk myself into going to the gym on my own. But having somebody that I've paid for my program, that's externally outside looking in, and even just reminding me, hey, this time last year you couldn't even lift your body weight, this time last year you were crawling, like hauling yourself out of bed. and just to throw up and then go to the gym or whatever. And in the future, like if you just stick to this volume week, etc., then in the next like 3 weeks you can expect to put 4 or 5 pounds on your next lift, or
Yeah.
refocus and stop thinking about your squat and bench PR and start thinking about your split squats PR. And like that kind of accountability is something that I think a lot of people undervalue, because they think to themselves, oh, I can write my own program, I know enough about lifting, I've done it before, I'll just do what I did through
Yeah.
college, do what I did through high school. And then it works for 6, 10, 12, 18 weeks, and then they start to dip off, or they get a girlfriend, or they get a new job, or they have a bad day at work and they just want to sit on the couch.
Yeah.
And that's like that spiral we talked about before, that like self-loathing spiral where you just start going down.
Complacency.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's obviously going to be different for different people. Different people will be motivated by different things. One positive frame that we try to adapt is something that just came to mind, is obviously it's easy. It's very easy to be motivated when you're hitting PRs every week, you're on a streak and everything's just going fine, and you're having some type of almost linear progress. Even like it's easy to stick around when times are good, and you can feel self-righteous when you're eating, and it's easy to stay motivated when things are going great and everything's a straight upward trajectory. But then again, taking up that frame as you hit a rough patch and as things slow down and you're not feeling all that motivated, maybe there's a slight little bit of, maybe not an injury, but like a slight aches and pains, a little bit of irritation, an achy tendon here and there. Like, what are you gonna do then? And a nice frame that we tried to adapt was that, okay, if say we have 12 lifting sessions a month and 4 or 5 of those suck, even if we can turn the majority of those sessions that suck into mediocre sessions, that will add up fast. If you do that for 3 months, you have 8 or 12 sessions that are now mediocre sessions because you just muscle through it and you just hold yourself accountable. Maybe you scale down, you still get all your reps in with intent and purpose and focusing on your technique. Maybe not as heavy as you would like right then and there, but if you turn 12 of those shitty sessions into mediocre sessions over the course of 3 months, that could mean substantial progress down the line 4 months later.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like go so far as to claim that this will 100% give you a substantial increase 4 months down the line, even if you're in a territory where even you're an ever so slightly advanced athlete.
Well, even doing something, you have to be willing to do something poorly to be good at it. And so even doing a shitty workout is still better than not doing any workout at all. And like you're still moving, and like you said, you can ingrain technique, you can ingrain movement patterns, and then you're still making progress. It's even still measurable progress. It's just maybe not the progress that you were looking at the time. And I think, like, I definitely don't always have the perspective to look at my training like that. I get really wrapped up in numbers and in PRs and in ego.
Mhm.
And so it's valuable to have um, that outside opinion and that outside accountability and input to be like, yo, look back 6 weeks and you couldn't have even attempted this weight that you're doing now. Look back
Yes.
12 weeks and look back a year ago. And like we have those logs, which is cool. We have those training logs with the weights that I was doing and when, and the notes about how I was feeling. And I have never tracked workouts like this prior to having a coach. Like I would have my little notebook with the program written out and I might jot
Yes.
down some big weights, but I would never track at the level of detail that we're tracking at. And having that data is like super motivating too whenever I'm having kind of a super shitty down month or couple weeks or even just a day where I'm just like, okay, I need to change and adjust my perspective.
We talked a lot about now about the mindset and trying to find a spin of, say, people that already have a little bit of a mindset going in, where there have been athletes, they are currently training for a certain sport, or they're already used to most of the time pushing it. But we already mentioned that different people are motivated by different things, and how maybe the coaching style will differ, or maybe the whole approach of how to find mental frames for training and nutrition may completely differ, whether maybe you're an introvert personality as opposed to an extrovert personality. What is the communication style gonna look like, and the coaching style? Or where, in my experience, what I can definitely attest is that having people who have been athletes or are in the military or a similar environment, who are used to already pushing hard, and then holding them back strategically so they can maximize their progress, where they're not going balls to the wall all the time, but just step on the gas when it's time to step on the gas with a purpose, is, in my experience, much easier. When now we're talking maybe training a little bit more of the general population, having people, maybe their goals are not hitting big numbers in the gym or certain numbers in the gym or hit the next PR. They could care less about this. Like, they want to lose a little bit of weight, they want to lose 20 pounds of body weight, they just want to have a little bit more energy in their day-to-day life, they want a little bit more quality of life, walking stairs, taking long walks, not being winded, having energy, having a little bit more control of their body weight, of their nutrition, and just feeling much better about themselves. Like,
Recovering from old injuries.
it when I started working with people professionally, also giving personal training sessions or something, like it coming from a background of coaching athletes, it would obviously have, like, it would have to have you, like, restructure your way of thinking. You have to look at it way different, show a little bit more empathy, and then see, okay, like, how do we need to spin this? Like, what are the actual things that are going through people's mind in a situation like that, as opposed to someone who is used to training, who is used to pushing it, and
Yeah.
then motivating people who are not used to pushing it to actually push it when it's time to push it, is, in my experience, is much harder. As well as, obviously, someone who's a little bit more introvert and may not like to talk about himself all that much, is maybe also just something that will
Yeah.
um, lead into situations where a little bit more communication is obviously then helpful, trying to talk about training, trying to talk about nutrition, where then someone's like just used to holding back in that regard, um, is maybe then also going to require a different approach with empathy and asking the right questions at the right time,
Yeah.
to then get them to open up a little bit more, and give you more feedback, where then, if you're a slightly assertive personality, you can go down a rabbit hole where you're just having monologues at certain times.
Yeah,
And
so I have a question then, because obviously my coaching calls with you are very similar to this, because I've learned to be extroverted, and I've learned how to engage and socialize with people, which I can
yeah,
talk about a little bit later. But so our calls are always very active and almost always take at least 45 minutes. And we always
sure, yeah,
usually cover the full scope of training, from not only the physical progress we made last week, but where am I mentally? What am I doing leading into this next
yeah,
week? And that's just things that I've learned, but you have clients that don't do that. So how do you encourage them to get the most out of their call? Or if you there's somebody listening that's introverted and they feel very uncomfortable, or they don't enjoy talking to people for extended periods of times, what advice would you give them
yeah,
if they're thinking about working with a coach to get the most out of what they're paying for? Because it's not just the written
yeah.
program.
So at this point in my life, I take tremendous pride in being able to provide basically guaranteed results. So at this point in my life, having my clients have results is basically one of my very much like top priorities in my life at this point. So I try to look at it from an even value exchange perspective where, okay, so this is what we're dealing with. Maybe we're spinning our wheels a little bit. Maybe it's time to look at it from a different perspective for you to get the most value out of the service that I'm providing for you. Like, I want to provide you with maximum value with the time that we're given, with the resources and time that we have available. And in order to do that, we have to communicate open. Like, there's no point in, like, I want to know when things suck. I want to know when you feel demotivated, and I want to know about the stuff that you dislike about the process right now, or what's going on maybe outside the gym that's holding you back and maybe like fucking with you mentally a little bit.
Mhm.
Because if I don't know about things, like, I can't help you find those frames. And this is also something that people probably should realize about, where it be online fitness coaching or in-person personal training or coaching in general, is that, okay, a training program, a nutrition program, numbers games with calories, or manipulating your training volume variables, all of those things are good and well, and you can probably to a certain extent do some research, get a program from the internet, and if you perform it with quite a bit of effort, you're going to get some type of result, even though you may still run through a lot more trial and error with the nitty gritty. A lot of the value that's going to be able to be provided to you by a coach is just everything that goes on besides numbers, besides just bare bones nutrition and bare bones training variables, is going to be those little bit of mental hurdles, like the framing of it, and maybe like um pushing too hard, pushing too little, where this is much more than going to be a little bit of sports psychological factors, as opposed to just doing sets of 5 one week and doing sets of 8 the next, right?
Yeah. I think one of the things I had to work through in my adult life, which helped me ultimately become more extroverted, is that so I spent a lot of time in training for the infantry in survival mode, um, with a group of people that were like objectively not good people. Like I could go into it, but I won't. A lot of them had legal trouble following a lot of the training. And so I spent a lot of time really wrapped up
Not
and
everyone, not everyone who's going through legal trouble is a bad person, though.
no, but maybe if you drink and drive, you're not a good person. Maybe if you drink and drive, maybe if you got in trouble for harassing people down the line. But I spent a lot of time in survival mode and really deeply introverted, like turned completely in on myself and just to tune out everything that was happening around me. And in that survival mode, one of the things that I taught myself just to again survive was that you can't show any kind of weakness. Like they can't see any reaction, they can't see any weakness, no emotional, physical, whatever reactions. Like you just hunker down, put your head down, do the work. And like there's a lot of people might say, oh, that's terrible. And yeah, it was, but also it was very valuable in a lot of
I
ways.
feel like it's actually
However, I
very
had to
sound advice in many
well,
situations.
for that situation, for where I was, it was life or death. Like it was the difference between did I continue to keep living or did I give up? And I didn't want to give up. And so, but I had to reteach myself after that. I had to, and I of course I had to seek therapy because there was a lot of other stuff going on. Like about that same time, I had a bad breakup, and that's about the same time I got diagnosed with cancer, and then I lost my job. So I had like a maximally shitty situation where I was in deep survival mode, very introverted, very like, don't talk to me. I'm not going to tell you my problems. Like, it's too much for me to even talk about. And I had to really force myself out of my comfort zone and relearn how to be social. And it was one of the biggest things that was so difficult is that people that are extroverts, people that are social, people that enjoy other people, they genuinely care usually about your issues. Like you said, as a coach, you're fascinated by progress and by the way that people are doing and the things that affect their training because you're deeply interested in that person's progression. And
Yes.
so I would say like a lot of my introversion was wanting to protect myself, wanting to just be told what to do and get it done and like have no more trouble That's what I wanted. It was simple, it was easy, it was non-threatening. Whereas sharing when I'm not feeling good, sharing when I'm having like weak moments is extremely vulnerable. And I had to really force myself to learn how to share with people where I was actually at. And then I found over time, of course, that I was getting very positive reactions from not only people that cared about me, but even like people that I was just meeting, just sort of becoming acquainted with and trying to make friends. Because I came out, like, I've always been a fairly introverted person. I have a very close circle of friends. If I don't like people, I don't generally talk to them. Or I'll talk to them for a very small amount of time and then I need to go home and like recharge my entire social battery because it was exhausting. However, the more I practiced interacting and sharing and like being authentic to who I am and how I was feeling and what I was going through at that particular moment, then I found more and more people not only wanted to be my friend and be around me and hang out with me, not because like what I was doing necessarily made them feel good, but because I was being an authentic person, that they could trust what was coming out of my mouth and they could trust, where I was, and just kind of giving them the courage to share what they were going through. Because I've seen time and time again that if you ask a group of people like, hey, how are you guys doing? Everybody's instant reaction is, oh, I'm fine. I'm doing fine, thanks. Like, I'm good, thanks. I don't need to. But the moment somebody's like, actually, I'm doing kind of shitty. Like, I'm not doing so hot. Then all of a sudden everybody else is like, oh yeah, I've been there and that sucks. And actually this thing is happening to me recently and I didn't feel good about it. And I'm still kind of dealing with the after effects. It's like, that's connection. And to be able to do that, like, I had to train myself, and a lot of it does come down to like, I don't always want to tell you when I'm not feeling good because I want to be like super strong and I want to be able to power through and I don't want to be weak. So I'm like, I don't want to tell Vince that I slept 4 hours last night because I'm stressed and anxious about this
No,
upcoming event that I have. Or I don't want to tell you when I'm hormonal. I don't want to tell you when I'm dealing with like a bunch of stupid, sad things among friends. But when I do tell you that stuff and you're like, well, that's why your training took a dip because, your stress takes a toll on your body, then all of a sudden it kind of puts a lot of other things in perspective and actually makes it easier to go about everything else that I'm doing.
yeah, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. um all of this is maybe then also later going to segue nicely into like a segment that we have planned for the later half or third of the podcast about how to maybe make a conscious effort if you're a certain personality type, where it be introvert, extroverted, to not have that be like a self-fulfilling prophecy where, okay, that's just how I'm wired, I can never do better, and I'm just going to be like that forever and have that always be a detriment to what I would like to do or not to do. Or maybe
Yeah.
even then, if you're self-aware or got a bunch of assessments, like maybe even have it be like a little bit of a detriment, of a roadblock, because you're just talking yourself into things being much more of a blockade than they would need to be. What you just mentioned about, it's like always like funny where I would talk to other people or um, hear about like how my athletes or my clients are talking amongst each other about some project. Like, fuck, they didn't even tell me. Like it
You
makes
just don't
sense
want to
to
tell
me that,
that.
of course, like being the coach, you're in that little bit of a position of authority where people don't want to disappoint you and they want to be strong at all times. Whereas then, like maybe confiding to me about those things, I would yeah, much more likely help you find a spin to it or help you find a solution much quicker. But yeah, it's always like, it's like a little bit funny, but also like you're like, man, if they
I just
just
think it's funny that they tell me because the
take,
first thing
yeah.
I do is I tell them. I'm telling. Like, if you tell me,
Yeah,
I'm telling on you.
take a
Like,
leap of faith and just tell me what's going on. And
yeah,
usually like this is also where, like we mentioned this thing earlier about, okay, different personalities, different styles of motivation, different styles of coaching, where this is still something that believed in right from the start very firmly is just that um, these things have to be structured on individual custom tailored approaches. Like there's not going to be cookie like right from the start I was very much opposed to people like, okay, buy my training program, $100, and like everyone buying it is going to get the same program. Where I don't know, that just never really made sense to me, that there's going to be what quote unquote the fitness industry would call cookie cutters. There's
Yeah,
something
one
that
size
never
fits
made sense
all.
to me. Where
Yeah.
what we just mentioned, like I always believe that no matter how little hands-on coaching you're actually going to get, there needs to be some type of customized approach, because we're all, at the end of the day, with things like fitness, nutrition, strength training, everyone as an individual has different goals. It's not even working in teams in sports like that, still people need individualized coaching approaches.
Mhm.
It's going to be fairly limited to just the degree to which you can very much like generalize stuff like that. Even though, granted, what we mentioned earlier, of course, some general principles will be, some will be sort of set in stone. Like there's not going to be um, certain principles that are not going to be overturned, even though going from individual to individual. But keep in mind, like an
Yeah.
individualized approach is very important and very much necessary.
So I actually, this is kind of like a funny story, but it relates. When I first started lifting, it was 2011, 2012, back in the like peak Reddit fitness forum days, like all the peak like online forums. We were just kind of starting to get into weightlifting as, I guess, like coming off of the Pilates and diet and exercise of the like 80s and 90s. And I joined this website called Photocracy, which was like, because I was so very socially inept. Like I grew up on a farm with my brothers, so I knew how to talk to my brothers, but I didn't really know how to talk to people outside of my family. And I was kind of a nerd through high school. And so I joined this site because what it did was it gamified lifting for me. And because it was like a Facebook game community style, I was able to really kind of learn to talk to other people about fitness and really connect with other also nerds that were looking for a game or looking for a way to level up, um, and kind of become more social in the fitness realm. And so I became like very good at talking to people about fitness. And although I didn't realize it at the time, basically what I was learning is that so being social and being engaged with people and being uh, extroverted is actually, it's a muscle that you can train, right? Like to this
Yeah.
day, I wouldn't call myself an extrovert because when I talk to new people or when I spend a lot of time in crowds, I'm still very drained at the end of the day. I'm not energized. I just want to go home and sit in silence, and I will. But people are very surprised when I tell them that because, oh, you're so social, you talk so much, you know, you're so much fun to be around. And it's because I've really worked that muscle. I've really practiced how to talk to people, how to get people engaged with me, because I had a very hard time and I really wanted to be like, I wanted to have friends. I wanted to be social. I wanted to, you know, go out with people, have parties and be able to talk to strangers and like not be kind of the awkward fly on the wall. And so it started not good. It started with doing like painful small talk and forcing myself to do it because that's the way you get better. And then the more you realize that small talk, because a lot of introverts will tell you, I don't want to do small talk. I just want to talk about shit that matters. But you have to do the small talk with people to get them to a point where they trust you enough to be vulnerable enough to talk about the shit that matters to them. So sometimes you have to talk about the weather or what they do for a living or, you know, what kind of car they drive, what kind of shoes they collect, whatever they're into at a surface level before you can deep dive. And it's just like any other exercise. Like you can't walk in and bust out a 200-pound deadlift without first training up, you know, and doing a 95-pound deadlift, 135-pound deadlift. And that's, if you look at socialization in that way, you have to understand you can't just deep dive into what people really care about, what people are really passionate and like vulnerable and thinking about all the time before you talk to them about the lighter stuff. And I think a lot of people kind of take that for granted. But if you look at people who are very social and easily engaging with people, they always start out with, "Hey, what's your name? My name is, this is what I do. What do you do?" And it's kind of like it's a back and forth. It's a dance. And there's like, I'd say that a coaching call with your fitness coach who you're paying to talk to is a very safe place to practice those skills. To be like, "Hey, um, this is what I did last week in the gym. This is how I was feeling." And then go from there. It's you got to work it out. You got to
No.
really flex your social muscles and get good at talking to people if you really want to get the most out of anything you're doing.
So people should probably then realize that what we're trying to say is your personality is not static. You can make a conscious effort. You don't have to have that be a self-fulfilling prophecy. You can make a conscious effort to just, if you're self-aware enough, you know a little bit what your flaws and your issues a little bit are, like, it's absolutely possible over long,
Mhm.
um just
And
long term.
yeah, different events are going to change your personality too. Like I did Jordan Peterson's Big 5 personality test years and years ago, like when it first came out. I did it, I must have been just out of college. And I remember because I scored extremely high in agreeableness. Well, then I redid it years later. I'd like forgotten about it, forgotten the questions, everything. This was after military training. So, in the first, and I have both results now. I was just looking at them the other day because I think it's like very funny and a very key indicator that your personality can change and be affected by the things that you do and the things that you experience. Because in my first round of that, I scored like 97th percentile agreeableness, meaning I was extremely agreeable. I just went along with whatever anybody said all the time. And then when I came out of military training and I like digested that for a few years and I took the test again, I came out extremely disagreeable, which sounds like really bad, but basically he broke it into conscientiousness and politeness. And so the first time I took it, I was extremely high in conscientiousness and extremely high in politeness. I think I was in like the like 90s of both of those. But when I took it again after like many years and I'd forgotten about it, I scored in the third percentile of politeness and the 70th percentile for conscientiousness, which basically, according to him, means that I challenge authority and I might be a little bit rude about it, but I'm also very aware of like how people's emotions around me and how people are perceiving what I'm doing and everything. And I think that that's a very clear and striking example of how I went through a series of changes that kind of fundamentally changed who I am as a person. And my personality changed in direct proportion to that. And so when people are like, "Oh, this is just who I am, this is how I'm wired. These are my genetics," because we hear that a lot too. "Oh, you're genetically skinny, you're genetically fit." It's just a cop out because you can apply pressure on certain parts of your life, especially if you're not happy with them, to force them to change. And you can practice until they change into something and you can shape them into something that you really enjoy.
Very much so. And you should, whereas then probably it's much easier said than done to tell people, okay, just counterbalance, right? Like it's very hard work,
Yeah.
where usually like your personality will still be a frame in which you operate. A lot of those things will be conditioned into you through your upbringing, and a lot of what you mentioned, life experiences and phases that you go through, and maybe events. Obviously it is very much able to have your personality within its traits um go from a few standard deviations, another few up or down, but still it's very much hard work. Like
Yeah.
many people, um I mean, potentially even listening may just think that, okay, but you don't know how hard it is when, um,
Oh,
obviously is
I
also a
know.
fine line to be walked, where I mean, how much do you want it? How much do you want the responsibility for your own well-being or your own progress, where maybe like the emotions that you are most comfortable with may not be comfortable emotions at all. Maybe you just like to feel a little bit miserable here and there, where
Yeah.
humans seem to be sometimes having those perverse masochistic emotional tendencies, where um it's very easy to come up with what you meant, what you just said about cop outs or cope, or having
Mhm.
it be a convenient excuse to then just never really take up responsibility for yourself, for getting your life in order, or just trying to do a little bit better one step at a time.
Well, and
It's pretty
change is
hard.
incredibly painful. Like that's the thing too. As I say all this stuff now because I've been through it and I've synthesized a lot of it and I'm standing on the other side of that change, but the process of changing was incredibly painful. And it doesn't have to be as severe as like what I went through to get there, like, but there were several moments that I had, because I was, for example, so agreeable, that I had got myself backed into a corner in a situation that I really didn't want to be in and that was actually kind of life threatening to me. And I had to evaluate and like decide, why did that happen to me? How did I let that happen to me? Take a lot of responsibility and then internalize that pain instead of coming up with a coping mechanism. I had to internalize that pain and then let it kind of fuel the change. But it's the same, it's not that different than trying to, build your strength in the gym. Like you're not going to get a heavy squat or a heavy deadlift without a significant amount of soreness along the way. And it's going to take time and commitment and effort. But if like you might not be sore every workout, but you are definitely going to be sore many workouts or several workouts. And the process of change is always painful. Like you are literally changing the structure of your muscle, of your personality, of how you think. And it's very naive. If somebody tries to tell you, oh, it's easy, just do it, that's a person to stay away from, because that's a very naive mindset. People that are like, oh, if you want to do something, you'll just do it. That's It's not going to happen that way. You might just start to do it, but you're going to hit barriers and you're going to hit very painful patches along the way. Self and find that accountability, an event in your life that motivated you, or a coach that you have to keep you, pushing. But
Yep.
I think it like I don't say this stuff lightly. I don't tell people like, oh, if you want to be something, then just do it. But you can change. You can push yourself that way. You can, you know, learn how to be more social, learn how to connect with people, learn to be a better leader, learn to be a better client, learn to be a better coach. Like it's just going to be probably a little bit of a painful process.
Exactly. Like this is something that comes to my mind a lot as we talk about this, is then maybe what is the expectation? If your expectation is to be comfortable most of the time, or you catch yourself just going through uh, phases that have you a little bit complacent, and have you be very much relaxed, it's very unlikely that you're in a phase that's going to get you anywhere. Like you
Mhm.
will have to put yourself into a certain amount of discomfort, um, in order to have, like, when you phases where you look back 2 or 3 years and you see, okay, I probably was a very different person 3 years ago, how things were going and how I looked at things, and how my life has developed and where I made progress and where I didn't. If you're very comfortable, it's very, very unlikely that there's
Mhm.
going to be substantial progress, will be for your personality development, or it be business, sports, relationships. um
Yeah.
Complacency and being comfortable, and deep down people usually know this. Deep down people know about the stuff that they put off, no matter how much they cope, no matter how much they delude themselves. They know that a lot of their misery stem from the work that they've been putting off.
Yeah. You can even
And
be somebody like me or like Maddie or Sean who are always pushing and pushing and pushing for something else, and you can still get complacent in different areas of your life. Like
uh,
I've certainly done it recently where I was like, why is this not going well? Saying, well, because you were very complacent and that's why.
yeah,
It's still like it never gets any easier. You just kind of find a routine that works, or you find a framework or structure that helps you have those conversations.
it's very true. And I mean, that's just also then much easier said than done, in a way where we as humans, we're just meant to preserve mental energy, we're just meant to preserve physical energy. Like we were literally wired to avoid as much effort as possible. So the question is then also like, maybe be, how honest do you want to be with yourself, in a way where, do you really want to grow? Do you want to grow as a person or not? Like, in my opinion, it's absolutely fine if you're just authentic and open and absolutely honest, especially with yourself, looking in the mirror. Like, okay, maybe I just don't want this and that. Maybe it's just
Yeah.
not really what I want. Maybe I want a little bit more comfort in this and that area of my life. And maybe my life setup allows me for it, and it's just perfectly fine. Like,
Yeah.
it's also easy to hinder progress just overburdening yourself
Yeah. I think
and
that
running
that's
yourself a little bit into the ground. It's also possible on the flip side, obviously.
yeah, you can definitely take it too far. And I think a lot of people might wonder like how do you stop yourself from taking it too far? And for me, what's always been very successful is just having a clearly defined goal or a clearly defined why. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like a physical goal per se, but it's like, why are you doing what you're doing? Why, for me, the reason why I train to be as strong as possible in the gym is not because I want to look good or anything, but
Mhm.
because I want to be reliable to my soldiers. I want them to know that they can trust me to do the bare minimum physical standard of my job. And I want them to know that they can trust me to have their back. And so when I put my shitty workouts in that perspective and in that framework, then all of a sudden it becomes like, okay, yeah, maybe I sucked at bench today, but at least I did complete the bench workout. And now I am in a micro amount closer to being more reliable, or I'm not only I'm demonstrating that I'm still reliable even on my off days. And so it doesn't have to always be that clear or that serious, but I think if you do have a very clear understanding of why do you want to do something, why are you going to this effort, it kind of helps put a backstop on what you're doing. Like in land nav, we're just full of army references today, but in land nav, when you're trying to get to a certain point, attack point to start with, which is, or you should, it's the best way to do it, I think. So you find an attack point, which is a clearly notable, obvious point on a map to enter your the wood line or whatever, you enter your azimuth to find the point. But you don't just have the attack point, you also should identify a backstop so you know when you've gone too far past your point. And you can use that same technique a lot of times when you're navigating yourself and the changes that you want to inflect on your life. Is like you should have an attack point, you should have a place where you want to start and that you can easily identify as this is a great starting point. And you should have a point on that map that you're trying to get to, and you should have a general idea of how far you should need to go to get there, but then you should have a point in your mind where you know it's too far. And if you do that, I think you'll find that a lot of those issues of like, how do I know when I've gone too far, how do I know when I'm taking it too far, when I'm being too honest or too harsh on myself, will kind of resolve themselves. It's like a little psychological framework that I use, which is like super nerdy, but it works. So it's not stupid if it works, right?
Yeah, it's definitely not stupid if it works. Yes, that, I mean, I feel like this was a very nice episode. I feel like we went a little bit deeper than usual into a lot of those things. Um, and I think this may just be a good point to stop. We got any closing words, closing remarks for this
Just
one
that,
today?
I mean, honestly though, just that if somebody's out there thinking about, do I need an accountability coach? Do I need a better programmer? Do I need a team of people that's going to keep me on the path that I want to be on? I would highly recommend that they take some time and speak to you personally and get to know you over a consultation or whatever. Because I mean, I'm here now. I'm your friend. I'm still your client, etc. But at the same time, you've added a lot of value to my life, and you've taken me to places with my training that I never would have accomplished on my own. And I have a huge ego, so it's like hard for me to admit that. But if there's people that are listening, that are kind of curious, or they're thinking to myself, well, I'm glad that works for her, but not for me. My training about, beyond just the weight room. What kind of community do you want to be a part of, and what are you building toward?
Yeah, yeah. We will definitely, just like always, put a few um, information, uh, like where you can find us on social media or an email address. Put some of those in the description box of this video if you're listening and watching on YouTube. If you're in Spotify, then head over to YouTube and look into that description box. It'd probably be much easier than me just giving you weird verbal cues of how to reach out. Yeah, I'm happy with this episode. We're gonna be back very soon for the next one. And if you enjoy this program, you got any comments or anything, please let us know. Instagram, Facebook, you will probably very easy be able to find us or give us some comments wherever you're at listening. And we'll be back very soon. So bye.